One of our top stories again today. Look at these pictures, so impressive. Many of the people who work on Capitol Hill say they haven't seen anything like it since 9/11. These are members of the U.S. National Guard receiving their weapons before taking up their positions around Washington. Security concerns and fears of new violence are growing after last week's attack on Congress and yesterday's second impeachment of Donald Trump. About 20,000 of these National Guard troops will be in the Capitol ahead of next Wednesday's inauguration of Joe Biden. That is reportedly more military right now than the U.S. has in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. Think about that. So many National Guard are in Washington, there's no place for them to sleep. Hundreds of them on the floor of the Capitol building. This video captured in the hallways, images that recall accounts from the U.S. Civil War, when Union forces at one point bivouacked into the House and Senate chambers. So some historical references, because these are unprecedented times, and this is the level of security now and through the foreseeable future there in Washington, but not just in Washington. Jared Maples is with us this morning, the director of the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness. Welcome to our program. Good morning.
Good morning, Heather. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really interested in what you are doing right now because federal authorities, Mr. Maples, have warned not just of the potential for violence in Washington, but in all 50 state capitals, in your state's capital, New Jersey State. So what is your assessment of the security threat level right now?
So we're in constant contact with our federal, state, and local partners, in particular the FBI. We work with them daily and over the last week, hourly, to make sure we're apprised of the best information regarding threats and what they're seeing and what we can do to use both of our resources to make sure we protect the state of New Jersey, and certainly supporting the federal government's efforts across the United States. With that said, there is no specific or credible threat to Trenton, New Jersey, but with that also said, there is that national narrative that you're seeing online, in chat rooms, in social media, and some of the other postings. You're seeing flyers out there about a day of violence on both the 17th and the 20th coming up. So we are very aware, acutely aware of the potential for violence, and something we're not going to have any of here in New Jersey. And we want to make sure that we dedicate resources, both intelligence sharing and in tactical elements, to make sure that there's no violence here.
Okay, I want to talk more about online and resources in just a second. I'm just curious, though, has there been any indication of any immediate impact of Donald Trump's impeachment yesterday, either a spike in the threat level or perhaps a reduction? I'm just wondering if you have any read in this very short term afterward.
So in the very short term, look, anything like that is going to increase online chatter. We have seen online chatter increased. Again, we're monitoring and we're making sure that we're keeping apprised from the federal, state, and local level. Overarching from a specificity perspective, we did not see an uptick in somebody taking an actual action or saying they were going to take an action beyond the normal rhetoric that you've seen throughout this last week.
But in mentioning that you're tracking online, and I know you do that very aggressively in New Jersey, as your materials indicate, many of the people who were involved in the violence on Washington, as I understand it, have gone dark, which makes it harder to track them, harder to assess the risk. How much does that increase your challenge?
So we've often talked about that as it is a real catch-22. Obviously, one of the biggest tools they have to recruit and incite violence is the internet, is social media platforms, et cetera. And we've seen that starting with foreign terrorist organizations, and certainly domestic extremists have adhered to that methodology in using social media and the online platforms to, again, incite, recruit, et cetera. And right now, to your point, they have gone largely dark. And that is concerning because we don't see all the narrative and all the rhetoric that's out there. And that's why it's so important for us to deal with the community, to make sure we're aware of threats as people see them right down into their community level. And we can handle it in a way that's adherent to everyone's rights, but doesn't trample on anybody else's rights and stops violence before it were to occur.
Who are you specifically looking at as representing the threat? What kind of groups, what kind of people?
So it's broad brush. We actually released, so it's a very interesting question, because we released 2 threat assessments this year, and that's abnormal. We normally release 1 threat assessment, and our threat assessment at the beginning of the year labeled white supremacists as a top-tier terror threat. We're the first state in the United States to have done that. And then we also had a mid-level terror threat of anarchist and anti-government extremists. And I think you'll probably see that as an uptick in the upcoming reports. But that led us into a threat assessment that we released in September that was really started because of the COVID crisis. We saw these extremist actors taking advantage of that to foment chaos, cause concern and panic throughout our citizenry. and making sure that we had the right information out there. And that moved into the civil unrest in the summer, the election cycle, and of course the contesting of the election that we're seeing right now. It really turned into a witch's brew, if you will, of these extremists using that rhetoric, those words, and pushing that out again to recruit and incite. So I think if we can keep them off of that incitement, that's a good thing. I don't want people being able to recruit openly and spew this hatred. But by the same token, to your point, we got to be able to make sure we're aware of it. And that's why that community aspect becomes so important to us.
It's interesting that second group you mentioned, the anti-government protesters. I think we have some video of Michigan, because it was anti-lockdown protester that actually moved. This sounds similar. You know, they moved in on the State House in Michigan to protest against COVID lockdowns and restrictions. So these are the threats you've identified. You were listening as I talked about how the National Guard are there in Washington in huge numbers and heavily armed. How are you preparing? What kind of resources are you assembling in order to face whatever threat there may be?
Yeah. So we have a great relationship with our state partners from a security perspective. The New Jersey State Police, our state and local partners, the county level. We have a very robust infrastructure for counterterrorism throughout the state. I'd say one of the leaders in the United States from a state level at our ability to move tactical elements into the right places, and then also that intelligence sharing that I talked about, which is so important to this conversation. So we've dedicated a lot of resources based off of that threat. We're taking this very seriously in manpower, in making sure, again, those intelligence assets are combined and collected in a central hub in our command post so that everybody's aware of the real-time threat intelligence on scene. A lot of anti-riot elements that have been in place since this summer. For better or worse, we've had some planning and some operational experience with this over the last 6 to 8 months, and so we're able to have those plans in place, the people in place, the knowledge in place, and we're going to continue to push that forward.
So, people, intelligence, and weaponry. Can I assume? Ready to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And then things like mitigation measures like traffic control and some of those other aspects. Again, not getting too far into the details. We don't want to tip our hands too much, but there are a large scale amount of resources that we're bringing to bear. And I also should add social media monitoring, obviously, and making sure we're aware of what's being said real time as well online.
That's what they're doing in Washington, too, closing down the streets around the Capitol and watching airports, et cetera. Let me ask, although really this is so fascinating, I hope we can come back to you in the days to come and talk further about this. But you were perhaps listening as Donald Trump released that video statement yesterday after the impeachment, not talking about the impeachment, but at a moment in that statement, the video address, he spoke directly to his supporters and followers and told them that there should be no more violence and that he was not a proponent of violence. I'm wondering whether you think that will take the temperature down, or what effect you think that will, if any, have.
I hope. I think that you've seen national rhetoric having an impact in some of these extremist camps, and it's not helpful to have violence espoused or talked about or intimated. When leaders come out and specifically talk about no violence and stopping violence, I think that's an important narrative and something we certainly hope continues from a national level, because it really does, it doesn't fan the flames. It really helps to sort of tamp things down, we think. And we're hoping over the upcoming weeks that will be the case, and that the national rhetoric remains one of no violence. The peace is the key here, and everyone has a right to protest in peace here in America and Canada as well. But it needs to be peaceful.
Jared Maples, again, thank you very much, and I will be in touch. We will be in touch with you in the future, and hopefully you don't face the threats that you seem to be preparing for so robustly. Thank you very much for sharing that information with us.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Appreciate it.